Hello and welcome to Black Marriage Therapy, BMT for short. Here we become students of marriage in order to create healthy, long-lasting relationships. I'm your host, Kristen Smith, and in today's episode, we discuss how to accept your spouse for who they are. Did you know that 69% of marital conflicts will not be resolved? Why do you think this is? I can tell you why. Because these conflicts stem from fundamental differences between the two individuals in the relationship. These problems are less about the bills, family, or sex, but more about how the individual sees and responds to these issues. This will cause natural disagreement between the couple, which brings me to this episode. Because if it's true that 69% of marital conflict will not be resolved, how do we navigate the fundamental differences in our spouse and still have a happy marriage? Let's talk about it. In this episode, we will discuss where natural differences come from, how to accept your spouse as a whole person, good and bad, and my own personal experience in learning this lesson and how it has helped my marriage to thrive. If you have been enjoying this content, please follow us on Instagram at Black Marriage Therapy. Rate us on your podcast platform and share your favorite episode with a friend. We also have a unique opportunity for you to support this podcast monthly. All you have to do is go to our show notes and click the link to support this podcast. For as little as 99 cents per month, you could partner with us to continue to provide you with high quality content. This is a topic that I am very excited to talk about, and it stems off the branch of conflict resolution, which we have talked about on the podcast, but I want to take it a little bit deeper and really talk about some of the root issues of conflict resolution, which is our fundamental differences. And one way for us to deal with those fundamental differences is learn to accept each other. Now, I am not talking about toxic traits, toxic behavior. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about these things that are fundamentally different. And sometimes they're the things that's like really subjective or super petty that annoys us about our spouse, right? I found a Reddit post actually that was talking exactly about what I'm talking about. And I love the way that she worded it. And her question specifically was, how do you truly accept the parts of your partner that are harder to love? Right? That's a really good question. And I'm going to read a little bit of her post and go into our topic for today because I think it's really going to help us to understand what we're talking about. She said, I'm not talking about red flag behaviors, but things that are more subjective. For example, they handle a situation less ethically than you would, or they talk to customer service rep in a way that you disagree with. It's not that they're rude, but they're more persistent and firm and bullish, whereas I am far too nice. Or they may be aggressive in things like video games, or they believe in some philosophies that you disagree with. Or maybe it's something truly subjective, like they sing while doing chores and you find this incredibly annoying. That is the truth right there. She ended off by saying, I find myself really struggling not to have intrusive feelings and thoughts like, this is the person I'm really dating. Girl, let me tell you something. She's anonymous, so her name is not on here. But girl, you are not alone. That thought that came across your mind is you're not the only person who have had that thought. Where as you really start to get to know your spouse, and you're looking at them and you're like, wait, why do they do that like that? Or why are they like that? And you really start having some internal dialogue like, do I like that? Am I okay with that? And that's the conversation that she's really having. And that's the conversation I want us to look deeper within because the art of learning to accept your spouse is really going to benefit your relationship. Now, let's talk about first where these major differences come from or these fundamental differences stem from. The first place is through personalities. We know this, right? Introvert, extrovert, neurotic, agreeable, open to experience, or like adventurous. These are different type of personality traits. And according to research, this is pretty much sedimented by the time you're a teenager, right? You may see some temperaments as their children, But by the time they're teenagers, you kind of know their personality trait. And for a lot of us, we did not meet our spouses as teenagers, as like 13, 14 years old. So our personalities are set, man. This is just who they are. No matter what you do, they're going to be adventurous, right? Do you like it? Maybe not, but that's who they are, right? We're going to get to that more. The next part of what makes a person who they are is their values. Now, we did a whole episode on values, and it was the first episode of our season of season 3, and we talked about values. And values are fundamental beliefs or principles that guide your choices, behaviors, and actions. They represent what is important and meaningful to you on a deeper level. Some examples are integrity, honesty, compassion, family, personal growth, and community. These values, if they clash or they are significantly different with one another, may cause some issues, and this is where the fundamental differences can come from. The next thing is your family background. You may have been raised in a single parent home, or maybe a blended home, or raised by a grandparent, an uncle, an aunt, right? These are different things that shape the way they act, shape the way they see the world, the way they respond to certain stressors. The next one is trauma or somebody's history. This could be past relationships, childhood trauma, adult trauma, grief, ailments, different things like that. These are experiences that have significantly shaped who they are. So you are not just getting the person at face value for when you met them at, 25, 35 years old. You're getting everything that's behind that, right? And how they show up to you in this state now. And the last one is culture. Maybe you're in a mixed race relationship, right? Somebody's black, white. Maybe you're in a mixed religion relationship or a mixed class relationship. You may have been raised, with all your needs being met, and somebody else was struggling as they were growing up. These are all cultural differences, again, that shapes how we respond to our spouses in our behaviors. For example, if you guys are arguing about, spending time with each other, what spending time with each other looks like to an introvert versus what it looks like to an extrovert, two different things. And now you guys are having this argument, and it really ain't about spending time with each other. It's really about you guys having a different of understanding and seeing it in a different way, right? So you have to find the common ground first, where it's just like, okay, I have an understanding that you see it this way and I see it this way. How do we find the common ground? How do we create a win-win situation where we're both pleased in this place? Now that we have a level of understanding about like where these fundamental differences stem from, I want to talk about how to accept your spouse, because this is what the episode is about, right? This is why we're here. How do you accept your spouse for who they are? The first thing you have to do is have a level of self-awareness and self-acceptance. The more you understand yourself and accept yourself, it is going to be easier for you to do that for your spouse. If you can understand that you're a complex being, you have complex emotions, you have a family history, background, you have values, then when you see that in your spouse, you should be able to do the same. Now, this is easier said than done. If you read the book, The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, he specifically talks about how when we have our own faults and flaws, we are easily able to like attribute it to like, oh, mistake, or give ourselves some type of grace. But when we see flaws and faults in other people, we attribute it to negative character traits, or like we demonize them or shame them. And it's very unfortunate, because it's like, we are human beings. We're both human beings, right? So the more you get in touch with yourself, the easier it will be for you to get in touch with your spouse. You have to understand, and I want to say in this point as well, the self-awareness is also understanding that you kind of suck. All right. And I'm saying that very lovingly, right? We have our great parts and we also have our not so great parts. You're not perfect, right? And that should help you to humble yourself and have that level of self-awareness and self-acceptance, so that you can extend it to your spouse and say, you know what, those parts of them that kind of suck, I have parts of me that kind of suck as well, right? And that's okay. I can still love them and accept them. That's the first step. The second step is to, instead of assuming, be curious. If you were raised black, then you've heard, when you assume, you make a what? Y'all can finish the sentence because y'all know, right? So don't assume. Instead, be curious. If something happens, a situation, a conflict, right, where, you're getting upset, instead of saying, wow, why is this person disrespecting me? Or like, why is she getting loud? Why is she talking out of pocket? You can say, I wonder why this is so important to her that she's having this emotional response. Or I wonder why this is so important to him that he's having this emotional response. Right? And that takes work because you have to kind of get out of yourself. And that takes work because you have to get out of yourself, put yourself to the back burner sometimes to be curious and be like, wait, let me put my emotions aside for a second. Let me figure out what is behind this emotion. Let me figure out what is behind this behavior. Let's say we have a differences in our opinions about money and finances. This person wants to save, this person wants to spend. Why is it so important for you to save instead of like saying to yourself, wow, this person is so stingy? That's assuming versus being curious. The next thing you want to do is to remove your expectations. Simply put, are you trying to make the person something they are not? Are you trying to make the person something they are not? First of all, baby girl, who has the energy? Who has the energy? But I'll tell you the truth. People are in marriages and relationships sitting here trying to force people to be something they are not. And you are wasting your time because people can only be who they are. I am telling you the truth. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now. You have to remove those expectations. For example, if you want your husband to be overly chivalrous and open the door and meet you outside, like all these different type of things, your husband may not be that person. It's not that he's not helpful, it's not that he's not supportive, but he's not that type of person that you want him to be. He may just show up in a different way, right? Same thing for a man. Maybe you want her to be a freak in the sheets. Maybe you want her to be a freak in the sheet, like freak, and she's not. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna accept her and love her for where she can meet you at her capacity, or are you going to continuously argue and bicker over the person that she isn't? And trying to create her to be that person, right? He or she. I'm just using them interchangeably, okay? Don't be mad. But I'm just saying, remove your expectations. The next thing that you can do to learn how to accept your spouse is to have empathy. When you cannot agree, seek understanding. There are going to be many of times in your marriage. Somebody say it louder for the people in the back. Especially if you've been married just a couple of years and you're still in the honeymoon phase. God bless you. Love that time. Okay. Love that time because there are going to be many, many of time in your relationship where you are not going to agree. And what are you supposed to do in that moment? Continue to bicker? That can't be the answer. When you cannot agree, seek for further understanding. This has happened a lot in our relationship where we are just going back and forth. Like, I don't understand why we just can't agree on this thing. And it's because we have fundamental differences. Sometimes it's values, sometimes it's personalities, sometimes it's our backgrounds, sometimes it's our culture. We just different. So if you're going back and forth, seek understanding. And when you seek understanding, a level of empathy is able to open up. If you realize, wow, my spouse was raised in a financially insecure place as a child, that is why he or she cares so much about saving. Once that is revealed, I can love on that. I can show empathy to you. And now, therefore, I can say, okay, I don't agree with what you want to do, but I understand it. Now, and you do the same. This is where I'm coming from. You may not agree, but I understand it. And from that point and from that place, you can find common ground and try to figure out, okay, how can we work this out where it's a win-win situation? How can we work this out where we are both comfortable with what we are doing, right? The last thing is communicate. Communicate. I need to put it on a shirt because the amount of time I talk about communication is crazy. Communicate, period. Put it on a shirt. That's it. Oh my goodness. Okay. Communication. If you notice something about yourself or something about your spouse, talk about it. Discuss it. Seek some understanding. Let's figure it out. Let's talk about it, right? So, especially if you're doing some work on yourself and you notice something about yourself, you realize, you know what? oh my goodness, I really enjoy being adventurous. Maybe it's something you didn't know before. Share that with your spouse. Let them in on it. Tell them what that may look like, how you want them to join in on your adventure. Let it be a discussion. So communicate about the things that you're learning about you or your spouse. Now, if you learn things about your spouse, be a little bit more sensitive, especially if they haven't recognized it for themselves. So, those are the steps that I would suggest you take in order to start learning how to accept your spouse for who they are, the good and the bad. Now, here are two bonus tips that's going to help you as you learn how to accept your spouse. The first one, some of you guys may not know who your spouse is, right? Or you're still trying to figure out like who they are. Some of you guys know exactly who your spouse is, right? You're very keen, you're perceptive, you're observant, you can see their behavior patterns, and you're like, oh, I know exactly who you are. I know exactly how you act. But even though you know who your spouse is, you still find that you are hurting your relationship instead of helping it. And that may be because you are weaponizing the knowledge that you have of your spouse. So it's not that you have to find out their values or their background or their trauma or whatever like that. You know it. But instead of using that knowledge to show empathy and bring you guys closer in unity, you're weaponizing it to shame them. And if you're weaponizing the knowledge that you have about them to shame them, then you are going to continue to create division amongst you guys. And it's going to make the person shut down. They're not going to want to share with you. They're going to feel like who I am is the problem. Let's use the example in the Reddit post. The girl said that her spouse is like really pushy when it comes to customer service. She didn't say he was rude, but he's more pushy. She, on the other end, wants to be more nice and agreeable and things like that. Now, if she goes to him and be like, oh, why are you talking to people like that? You're inconsiderate. That's so not kind, blah, blah, blah. What do you think is that going to cause in the relationship? He's going to think that there's something wrong with him. There's nothing wrong with him. He just does it differently. He's not rude. He's just a little bullish. He's just a little persistent. He's just a little bit more firm than she is. Now, I'm talking about this specifically because this is me and my husband. I ain't gonna hold you. Now, whenever my husband get on the call with customer service, my husband is a very audacious man. He is going to ask for whatever he wants. Okay. And I'm more like, oh, okay, nice or whatever, like that. It used to piss me off. It used to annoy me because I'm like, why are you asking for that? They can't do that. Da, da, da. I'm limiting myself. Meanwhile, my husband's like, find me somebody who can do it. Not even in a rude way, but just like, this is what I want done. Can we get it done? Right. And now I realize how much of a benefit it is to me because, baby, get them fees off. If you can get the fees off, get the fees off. Okay. anyways, anyways, let me stay focused. Let me get back to my point. Okay. Lord, if I can find my point. So that bonus tip is basically be mindful of weaponizing your knowledge of your spouse against them. That brings me to the second bonus tip, which is you want to enhance the positive and diminish the negative. We all have good parts about ourselves and bad parts about ourselves. We also have parts about ourselves that could be both, depending on how you look at it, right? It could go good or it could go bad, right? But what you can do as a spouse, because you're in this privileged space of vulnerability and safety with your partner, you can enhance those positive things. When you see those things about your spouse that are great, talk about it, encourage it. Like, hey, let's figure out how to make this better. Let's figure out how to make this useful, right? And the negative things, you can lovingly help them to correct, help them to refine, help them to grow in that area. It still may be who they are, but if it's refined, it's a little bit smoother around the edges. For instance, I mentioned that my husband is very audacious. He can ask with no problem, right? Can that be bad sometimes? Yeah, it could be. It could if it's the wrong time, if it's the wrong place, if he's not really reading the room, right? But it could also be good. So when I mention those things, I'm like, hey, how about we refine this? Read the room a little bit. You can still be audacious, but refine it a little bit, smooth out those edges where it's useful to you. So those are my two bonus tips for you guys as you learn how to accept your spouse for who they are. Now, just to wrap it up, I want to talk about this to you because most of the time, y'all, when I come on this mic, I be telling y'all my personal business. Okay. A lot of these episodes stem from things that I have had to go through myself. Junior and I both have had to experience ourselves. And this is true for this topic as well. So for me, one of those fundamental differences that I had to learn how to accept from my husband was that he could be more rigid. And this would show up in a lot of different ways in our relationship, right? Whether that was finances, whether it was conversations or decisions that we had to make, whatever it was, he was so inflexible. And, we've had this conversation over and over and over again. I'm like, and the exact words what I would say is like, I just feel like you're so inflexible. Like, you can't make any changes. Like, once you decide something, there's no room for change, right? So, and that was very frustrating for me because I'm not that way. So we would always constantly clash. And it took a lot of conversations and years of work to come to the point of realization where it's like, wait a second. Yes, he's rigid. Is this good or bad? It's kind of both, right? It's depending on what you're looking at. If it's about, maybe with finances and a budget, that can benefit as well because we need to be kind of rigid. We need to be on top of our finances. But when it comes to other things like a date night, or when it comes to other things like, you know, our children, like there has to be some flexibility in there because we are living life. We're human beings. Things are going to get canceled. Things are going to change. So is it good or bad? It depends on the way you look at it. But what I had to learn is exactly what I'm telling you guys, which is asking myself these questions. Who do I want Junior to be? What are his values? What is his personality? What is his background? Why is he like this? And through my own curiosity and the conversations that we had together, we were both able to come to the understanding that, okay, yes, you're rigid, but it's mainly because you value action. Whenever you say you're going to do something, you want that thing to be done. So you don't feel like there's any room for not getting that thing done. But once I was able to understand that, right, because we talked about understanding and empathy, and I can empathize with him, now I'm at the place where I'm like, okay, babe, I understand that you value action. I understand that when you say you want things to get done, you want it to get done. But can you understand my point of view? How can we find common ground? How can we work on this so it's not so painful, it's not so combative, but maybe we can come to common ground where we can have a win-win situation. And ever since we were able to learn that lesson, that's just one example because there's many different ways on how we had to learn how to accept each other. But once we were able to have that baseline understanding, we were really able to move forward in this area in our life. Now, so that's where I really want to end the episode. I want to really just highlight this point that sometimes we wait like 25 years, 30 years to get to know our spouse, or we stumble upon getting to know our spouse, right? And to accept them for who they are, just as life happens, as circumstances happen. And I just want to encourage you that even if you're married 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, you can actively participate in learning your spouse, getting to know your spouse, and accepting your spouse for who they are. You don't have to wait till you're 25 years in and all these things, right? You can do that now. You don't have to stumble upon it. You can do that right now. And of course, as situations change and you transition, maybe you have kids, maybe, you change jobs or lose a parent, that person is going to change as well. But then you have another opportunity to learn them, to accept them, and to love them for who they are. So that is all that I have for you guys today in this episode. Of course, we're going to end with a quote that says, the first step towards change is awareness. The second step is acceptance. This is from Nathaniel Brandon. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Black Marriage Therapy. If you haven't yet, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Black Marriage Therapy. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you soon.